I was 62, the day my son abandoned me. Not physically at first. But I could feel it the moment his eyes stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a burden. It was subtle. Like a quiet closing door somewhere deep in the house of my life. The kind of sound only a mother can hear. My name is Margaret Taylor. Though most people at the care facility now call me Mrs. T. I used to be a teacher, English literature. 35 years in the same small-town high school. Words were my life once. I taught teenagers to find meaning in sentences. To see beauty in pain. Now I sit in a quiet room that smells of antiseptic and fading hope. Trying to find meaning in what's left of my own story. I never imagined it would end like this, staring at pale green walls, with my son's framed photo on the bedside table. Smiling that polite smile of his. The one he reserves for people he's already decided to leave behind. Brandon used to be my everything. When my husband died suddenly of a stroke, it was just the two of us against the world. I poured everything I had into that boy, every dream. Every dollar. Every ounce of strength left in my tired bones. I thought love could build walls strong enough to protect us from anything. But I never realized love can also blind you to the knife being sharpened right behind your back. It started small. That's how betrayal always begins. At first, Brandon just seemed distant. The calls came less often. The visits became quick drop-ins instead of long dinners filled with laughter. When he did come, he always looked at his watch. Like there was somewhere better to be. Work's been insane lately. Mom, he'd say, hugging me with one arm, while his other hand clutched his phone. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe everything was fine. That he was just busy. Successful. Living the life I had dreamed for him. But the truth was uglier. And I should have seen it coming. After his father's death, Brandon took over our family's small house in Seattle's North End. I had transferred the title to his name to make things easier later. Or so the lawyer had suggested. It was meant to be an act of trust. Of love. I didn't realize it was signing away the last bit of control I had over my own life. He started changing the house renovations. New furniture. Tearing down my garden to make space for a parking pad. It'll increase the value, he told me. And it did. I suppose. Just not for me. One evening, he came over with that polished, artificial warmth that meant he wanted something. Mom, you've been struggling with the stairs, he began, his tone all concern and calculation. Wouldn't it be better for you to have somewhere with support, somewhere safe, a place where people can take care of you? I laughed at first. Brandon, I'm 62, not 90. But he didn't laugh. He kept talking softly, rationally, like a lawyer convincing a jury. Only I was the defendant, and my freedom was on trial. He spoke about facilities with gardens, activities, community meals. He even showed me brochures, pictures of smiling seniors holding hands, reading books under trees. It all looked so peaceful, so final. I just want you to have the best. Mom, he said, you deserve that. I should have known that when people start saying you deserve, it usually means they're about to take something away. A few weeks later, he insisted we tour one of those facilities just to see. I went along to humor him. The place was called Maplewood Living. Though there was nothing particularly alive about it, everything smelled faintly of bleach and resignation. The residents sat in recliners, staring at muted televisions. A nurse with kind eyes smiled at me as we passed. You'll love it here, she said. I remember thinking, she said that like I'm already staying. We left after an hour. I told Brandon it wasn't for me. He nodded and said we'd talk later. That night, he texted me instead of calling. I think it's for the best. Mom, I've already put down a deposit to secure your spot. I froze. My hands trembled so violently that my phone fell from my lap and cracked on the tile. That was the beginning of the end. The next morning, he showed up at my door with coffee, and that same infuriating calm. You'll thank me one day, he said. It's time to start the next chapter. I stared at him, unable to speak. My son, the boy, whose scraped knees I'd kissed, whose nightmares I'd soothed, was telling me it was time to be stored away like an old piece of furniture that no longer matched his modern life. That week was a blur. The moving truck came on a Tuesday. 2 young men boxed up my things while I sat on the couch in disbelief, holding my wedding photo like it was a lifeline. Brandon gave orders. Efficient. Detached. He had already arranged everything: the lease transfer, the paperwork, the payments. My life was now a file folder in his office. When we arrived at Maplewood, I remember the front desk woman greeting us cheerily. "Welcome, Mrs. Taylor, we're so glad you're joining us." Joining us. Like it was a club, like I hadn't been forced through the door. Brandon hugged me goodbye in the lobby. I can still smell his cologne, something expensive and cold. "I'll visit every week," he promised. "You'll see." He didn't. Weeks passed. Then months. His visits dwindled to short appearances where he'd check his watch, talk about his promotion, and leave early because traffic's bad. Eventually, the excuses stopped altogether. The staff noticed before I did. "You doing okay, Mrs. T?" the nurse asked one afternoon as she adjusted my blanket. I nodded, lying through my teeth. But that night, when I was alone, I broke. I cried until my throat burned. Not because I was lonely, I'd been lonely before, but because I realized the boy I'd loved so fiercely had turned into a man I didn't recognize. And then, one day, the truth revealed itself in the cruelest way possible. A young social worker came to speak with me about financial matters. I assumed it was paperwork for the facility. But when she hesitated, I knew. "Mrs. Taylor," she said gently, "your son has sold your house." The words didn't make sense. I blinked at her. "That's impossible. The house was in his name. But he promised. He listed it last month," she said softly. "It closed yesterday." Something inside me shattered, then a soundless break, like thin glass cracking under pressure. My home, the place where my husband's laughter once echoed, where Brandon took his first steps, where I'd buried pieces of my soul in every corner, that home was gone. He hadn't even told me. I sat in silence for a long time after she left, staring at my trembling hands. The betrayal wasn't just legal, it was spiritual. It was the kind of wound that bleeds inward, unseen, until it consumes you whole. That night, I went to bed early. I stared at the ceiling and replayed every memory: his first day of school, his high school graduation, the day he called crying because he'd failed his first college exam and didn't know how to tell his father. I'd stayed up with him all night, talking, reassuring, loving, and now he couldn't even call to tell me he'd sold the home that held our memories. That was the night my grief turned to something else, something colder, sharper. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was purpose. If my son thought he could discard me and live happily ever after, he was mistaken. He had taken my home, but he hadn't taken my memory, or my resolve, and I was done being quiet. For days after I learned the truth, I moved through Maplewood like a ghost in my own life. I went through the motions: breakfast at 7, pills at 8, television blaring by 9, but my mind was somewhere else, somewhere dark. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my house, the porch swing, my husband built with his own hands, the rose bush that bloomed beside the front steps every May, the window where I used to sit reading while Brandon played in the yard. It was all gone now, sold to strangers who would never know the history etched into its walls. I told myself I didn't care, that it was just a building, but I was lying. That house was the last piece of my husband I had left, and Brandon had sold it as if it were nothing more than a stock he was cashing out. For the first time in my life, I started to hate my own son, and that hatred terrified me. At night, I'd lie awake listening to the slow, rhythmic breathing of my roommate across the curtain divider. Sometimes she'd talk in her sleep, calling out to children who never visited. The sound tore through me. I wondered if that would be me soon. If one day, someone would whisper my name into the dark, and no one would come. But then something unexpected happened. A new resident moved into the room across the hall, an older woman named Lorraine. She had fiery red hair that had long since turned silver, and eyes that sparkled with a mischief that didn't belong in a place like Maplewood. She wasn't like the others. She didn't sit quietly waiting for the end. She talked back to nurses, snuck cookies from the kitchen, and laughed loud enough to wake the floor. She noticed me watching her one morning in the dining hall. "You look like a woman with a lot to say," she said, sliding her tray next to mine. "I used to be," I replied. "Well," she said, grinning. "Lucky for you. I'm a great listener." And just like that, something cracked open inside me. Over the next few weeks, I found myself telling her everything about my husband, about Brandon, about the betrayal. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened, her eyes steady and fierce. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You know what your mistake was. Margaret, you raised him too well." I frowned. "Too well? You taught him how to take, not how to give. You taught him that love means doing everything for someone. And now he thinks he's entitled to your sacrifices." Her words cut deep because they were true. I had always prided myself on being selfless, on giving without expecting anything in return. But maybe I had mistaken self-erasure for love. After that day, I began to change in small ways. I stopped letting the nurses choose my clothes for me. I started walking outside instead of sitting in front of the television. I joined the art therapy class not because I could paint, but because I needed to remember what it felt like to create something instead of just existing. One afternoon, I was painting a tree, its roots tangled, its branches reaching desperately toward the light when Lorraine walked in and looked over my shoulder. "That's not bad," she said. "It's ugly," I replied. She smiled. "Maybe. But it's honest. And that's more than most people ever manage." I didn't realize it then, but that painting became my first step toward reclaiming myself. A few weeks later, during visiting hours, Brandon finally showed up. He arrived unannounced, wearing an expensive suit and an expression that looked rehearsed. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek like a stranger greeting an acquaintance. "You look good." "I didn't expect you," I said, folding my arms. "I've been busy. Work's been crazy. The new house. The baby on the way." I froze. "Baby." He smiled sheepishly. "Didn't I tell you Laura's pregnant? Due in 2 months." I forced a smile. "Congratulations." He didn't notice the tremor in my voice. He kept talking about the nursery, about their new home near the lake, about how excited he was. "You should see it." "Mom," he said. "It's beautiful. Big backyard. Modern kitchen. A guest room if you ever..." His voice trailed off. He realized what he was saying. "If I ever..." What I asked quietly. He looked down at his hands. "If you ever want to visit..." The words stung more than if he'd slapped me. Visit. As though I were some distant relative, instead of the woman who'd raised him. When he left, I walked outside into the courtyard, the winter air biting against my skin. Lorraine found me sitting on the bench, staring at nothing. "Let me guess," she said. "He came to make himself feel better." I nodded, too numb to speak. She handed me a cigarette unlit. "Symbolic. You can't change what he did," she said, "but you can decide what comes next." "What's left to decide?" I whispered. "He's taken everything." "Not everything," she said. "You still have your name, your story, your truth. Use it." That night, I couldn't sleep. Lorraine's words played over and over in my mind. My story, my truth. I'd spent my whole life teaching others to use their voices. Yet I'd gone silent when it mattered most. Maybe it was time to speak. The next morning, I borrowed a laptop from the facility's library. I hadn't touched a computer in years. But the moment my fingers hit the keys, something inside me woke up. I started writing not about grammar or literature, but about my life, the marriage, the motherhood, the betrayal. Every line came out raw, angry, alive. It began as a letter to Brandon, but by the second page, I realized it wasn't for him. It was for me. Days turned into weeks. Every afternoon, I wrote for hours. I poured every wound, every secret, every scream I'd ever swallowed into those pages. And when I finished, I printed it all, 132 pages of truth. I titled it, "The Son Who Sold His Mother." Lorraine read the first few pages and laughed softly. "This isn't a letter," she said. "It's a weapon." "I don't want revenge," I said. "I just want him to know what he did." "Maybe," she said. "But revenge has a funny way of finding us when we finally tell the truth." A month later, I got a call from a local community magazine. One of the younger staff members from Maplewood had anonymously submitted my manuscript to them. They wanted to publish an excerpt in their Mother's Day issue. When the story came out, it spread faster than I ever expected. People shared it online. Mothers wrote letters. Daughters called their mothers in tears. The comments were filled with strangers saying, "This is my story too." And then one morning, my phone rang. It was Brandon. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking. "You wrote about me." "Yes. Everyone knows." "Mom." My boss read it. "Laura's parents saw it. You embarrassed me." "I didn't write it to embarrass you," I said calmly. "I wrote it because I finally decided to stop protecting the person who hurt me." He was silent for a long time. "You've ruined my life," he whispered. "No, Brandon," I said softly. "You ruined mine. I'm just telling the truth." He hung up without another word. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. I woke the next morning to find Lorraine waiting in the hallway with 2 cups of coffee. "You look lighter," she said. "I think I am." She smiled. "Good, because I have a feeling your story's not finished yet." And she was right. It wasn't. The morning after Brandon's angry call, Maplewood was strangely quiet. Or maybe it was just me who felt the stillness, the calm that comes after a storm you've survived. I sat by my window with my coffee, watching sunlight scatter across the frost-tipped grass outside. I thought about all the years I'd spent defining myself through other people as someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's sacrifice. For the first time in decades, I felt like I belonged to myself again. But peace never comes without an aftershock. 2 weeks later, the facility director knocked on my door. Her smile was polite. Her tone rehearsed. "Mrs. Taylor, we've received a call from your son. He's concerned about the content of your story." I stared at her, unflinching, concerned about the truth. "You mean?" She hesitated. "He's threatened legal action if your name continues to be associated with the article." I laughed a bitter, quiet sound. "Let him sue me. He already took everything else." She shifted uncomfortably, murmured something about hoping to avoid conflict, and left. But I could tell she was curious. Everyone was. The article had spread beyond the local magazine now. A regional paper had picked it up, calling it "A Mother's Quiet Revenge." There was even talk of a feature on a morning show. And while I didn't write it for attention, I couldn't deny the small, guilty pleasure of it, watching the story grow. Watching the world finally see me. Not the quiet teacher. Not the discarded mother, but a woman who refused to stay erased. Lorraine was delighted. "You've caused a revolution." "Darling," she said one evening, lighting her contraband cigarette by the window. "Half the women in this place are scribbling letters now. You've woken them up." Her laughter filled the room, and for the first time, Maplewood didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a secret society of survivors. Women who had been tucked away, silenced, forgotten, and were now whispering their way back to life. Still, I couldn't ignore the knot in my chest whenever I thought of Brandon. There were moments, usually late at night, when guilt clawed at me. I'd lie awake wondering if I'd gone too far. If airing our family's wounds had doomed whatever faint chance there was of reconciliation. But then I'd remember the night I learned he sold the house, and the guilt would dissolve, replaced by something harder, truer, a quiet certainty that some bridges deserve to burn. One rainy afternoon, a nurse brought me an envelope, my name written in Brandon's handwriting, sharp, slanted, familiar. My hands shook as I opened it. It wasn't a letter. It was a check. 25元. Ling ling ling. No noche. No explanation. Just his signature scrawled at the bottom. I stared at it for a long time, trying to decide what it meant. Was it guilt? Was it hush money? Some distorted attempt at redemption? Lorraine peeked over my shoulder. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said finally, tearing the check neatly in half, then into quarters, then into tiny pieces that fluttered like confetti into the trash. I don't want his money. I want my dignity. Lorraine gave a low whistle. You're a better woman than me. No, I said softly. Just a woman who's finally learned the cost of selling her soul. A few days later, something unexpected arrived in the mail. A letter not from Brandon, but from his wife, Laura. It was written in neat, slanted handwriting on expensive stationery. Dear Margaret, you don't know me well, but I've read your story. I need you to know it changed something in me. I had no idea what Brandon did. He told me you insisted on moving into the facility, that you were lonely, that you didn't want to be a burden. I believed him, but after reading your words, I started seeing things I didn't want to see. I'm sorry for what he did to you. Truly. At the bottom, she had written one last line. Smaller, shakier, I'm leaving him. I read that sentence over and over until the letters blurred. Then I pressed the page to my chest and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time, I felt something that wasn't anger or grief. It was vindication not from revenge, but from truth finally finding its way into the light. When I told Lorraine, she grinned. So, the mighty sun crumbles at last. I didn't want to destroy him, I said. I just wanted him to feel something. Oh, he's feeling it, she said with a wink. Guilt, shame, fear, those are heavy weights for a man who's never carried anything but his own ego. A few weeks later, Maplewood's staff invited me to speak at a local community event about aging and independence. I almost said no, but Lorraine wouldn't hear it. You've started something, Margaret. Don't stop now. So I went. I stood on that stage under the dim auditorium lights, looking out at rows of faces, women with tired eyes, men with folded arms, caregivers, daughters, sons. My hands trembled at first, but when I began to speak, the words poured out like water breaking through a dam. I told them the truth, not just about Brandon, but about what it means to be invisible, to give and give until you disappear, to realize too late that motherhood, if not balanced with selfhood, can devour you whole. I'm not here to make anyone hate their children, I said, my voice steady. I'm here to remind you that love doesn't mean surrender. It's not noble to be silent when someone you raised begins to erase you. Speak up. Take back your story before someone else writes it for you. When I finished, the audience rose to their feet. Some clapped. Some cried. One woman came up afterward and hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. My son's doing the same thing, she whispered. You gave me the courage to stop him. That night, back in my room, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was thinner, my skin lined with years, but my eyes, they were alive again, Lorraine poked her head in. "You were brilliant," she said. "I was terrified." She smiled. "That's how you know it mattered." The next morning, the front desk buzzed my room. "Mrs. Taylor, there's a visitor here to see you." I assumed it was a reporter or one of the women from the community event. But when I stepped into the lobby, I froze. It was Brandon. He looked older than I remembered, hair graying at the temples, dark circles under his eyes. His expensive coat looked out of place against the sterile beige walls. "Mom," he said quietly. I didn't answer. He took a hesitant step forward. "I didn't come to argue. I just needed to see you." I studied him for a long moment. "Why now?" He swallowed hard. "Laura left. She took the baby. She said she couldn't live with someone who'd do what I did." A hollow ache bloomed in my chest. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to reach out like I always had. But another part, the part that had learned to survive, stayed still. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. About everything." I looked at him, my son, my betrayer, to my blood, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. "You can't undo what's done, Brandon," I said softly. "But you can decide who you become next." He nodded, eyes wet. "I just wanted you to know I read your book." He blinked. "Book?" He smiled faintly. "You didn't think it would stop at a magazine article, did you? It's everywhere. Mom, they're calling you the voice of forgotten mothers." My throat tightened. I hadn't even known it was published as a book. The magazine must have connected with a publisher. "Congratulations," he said, his voice trembling. "You found your voice." Then he left. I stood there for a long time after he walked away, the lobby echoing with silence. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air in my room felt charged, heavy with ghosts of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. I sat by the window long after the hall lights dimmed, watching the reflection of my own face against the glass. The world outside blurred by rain. It was strange. The ache I felt, not sharp anymore, not the screaming pain of betrayal. It was quieter now, like a wound that had stopped bleeding but would never fully heal. Brandon's visit had stirred something in me. I didn't expect not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. I could finally see the boy he used to be hiding inside the man. He'd become the boy who used to run down the hallway, laughing. The boy who clung to my arm at his father's funeral because he didn't know how to grieve. The boy I'd raised to be strong but had somehow taught to be selfish. And maybe, in some cruel way, I was responsible too. Lorraine found me the next morning, sitting in the dining hall before breakfast. A cup of cold coffee untouched in front of me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Maybe I have," I whispered. She sat across from me, studying my face. "He came, didn't he?" I nodded. "He said he's lost everything. His wife, the baby, his job. Probably." And for a second, I felt sorry for him. Lorraine leaned back, folding her arms. "That's because you're still his mother. It doesn't matter how deep the wound goes. Mothers are built to bleed and still reach for the child holding the knife." Her words cut deep because they were true. "But pity isn't the same as trust," she added. "You can understand his pain without letting him back into your life." I looked out the window, the winter sun barely climbing over the rooftops. I don't hate him anymore, Lorraine. I just don't know if I can ever love him the same way again. "You don't have to," she said gently. "You just have to love yourself enough to keep that door locked." That afternoon, I walked outside for the first time in weeks. The garden was bare now, the flowers long gone, but the trees still stood tall, skeletal, and stubborn. I sat on a bench beneath one of them, the wind tugging at my hair, And I thought about how everything in nature lets go when it has to. Leaves fall. Branches break. Roots stretch toward new soil. Maybe this was my season of letting go too. A few days later, I received a letter from a publisher in New York. They wanted to expand The Son Who Sold His Mother into a full memoir. They said my words had touched something raw in people, that it wasn't just a story about aging or betrayal, but about the courage to speak when silence becomes a prison. They offered me a contract. When I showed Lorraine, she whooped, so loud the nurse came running. "You're going to be famous," she said, clutching my shoulders. I laughed, though the thought felt surreal. I don't care about fame. I just want people to know what it costs to be forgotten. "Then you're the perfect person to tell it," she said. For the next 6 months, I wrote every day. Mornings, afternoons, sometimes late into the night when the world went still and I could hear the soft ticking of the clock above my bed. I wrote about my husband, the man who taught me that love could be quiet and steady, not just grand gestures and promises. I wrote about raising Brandon alone. The long years of worry, the pride I'd carried like armor. And then I wrote about the betrayal every moment, every silence, every ache. Some nights I cried while writing, my tears blurring the ink. Other nights I laughed at memories I'd buried under too much pain. Writing became a mirror I could finally bear to look into. It showed me who I was before the world convinced me I was only what others needed me to be. When the book was published, it spread like wildfire. They titled it, "The Mother Who Spoke Out." I thought the name was dramatic at first, but as I watched women across the country reading, sharing, crying, and telling their own stories, I realized it wasn't about me anymore. It was about all of us. Letters began pouring in from mothers, daughters, even sons. One man wrote, "I haven't spoken to my mother in 10 years. Your book made me call her." Another woman said, "I'm leaving the facility my kids pushed me into. I'm moving back into my own apartment. Thank you for reminding me I still matter." Every letter was a piece of my healing stitched back into place. One evening, as the sunset washed the walls of my room in soft orange light, the facility director came in holding a small parcel. "This came for you," she said, setting it on the table. The return address was familiar. Brandon Taylor. Inside was a single photograph, the three of us. Me, Brandon, and my husband, taken when Brandon was about 7. We were standing in the backyard. Brandon's arms wrapped around my waist. All three of us smiling. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were the words "I'm trying." "Mom." I sat for a long time staring at that picture. There was no apology. No promises. Just that one line. But somehow, it was enough. When I showed it to Lorraine, she looked at it. Then at me. "You going to write back?" I smiled faintly. "Not yet. Maybe one day. Maybe never. But I'll keep it." And I did. Months passed. My health began to falter, small things at first, then bigger ones. The doctors spoke in gentle tones, using words like chronic and progressive. I didn't ask how long I had. I didn't need to know. I'd already wasted too much life waiting for other people to tell me when things were ending. I decided to spend whatever time I had left doing something that mattered. So I started teaching again, not in a school, but right there in Maplewood, every Tuesday afternoon. I gathered the residents who wanted to write, to remember, to tell their stories. We called it the Truth Circle. It wasn't formal. We just sat in a circle of wheelchairs and plastic chairs, notebooks on our laps, pens trembling in our hands. We wrote about love, about pain, about the things our families forgot to ask us. And when we read them aloud, we cried, we laughed, we healed together. I remember one woman, Eleanor, writing a letter to her daughter who hadn't visited in 3 years. "I forgive you," she wrote, tears falling onto the page. "But I won't wait for you anymore." When she finished reading it, everyone applauded. Lorraine squeezed my hand and whispered, "You did this, Margaret. You gave them back their voices. But the truth is, they gave me mine." That night, I dreamt of my husband again. He was standing by the garden, smiling, the sun setting behind him. "You did good, Madji," he said. "You found your way back." I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but they weren't sad ones. The following spring, I held a small book signing in Maplewood's lobby. The publisher insisted on sending boxes of my memoir, and they set up a table with flowers and tea. Local reporters came, cámaras, even a few familiar faces from the community event. I looked around and saw something beautiful women who had once been silent, now standing in line to tell me their stories. Some brought their children. Some came alone. Some came just to hold my hand and whisper, "Thank you." And then, near the end of the line, I saw him, Brandon. He didn't approach right away. He stood by the door, watching, holding something small in his hands. When the line cleared, he finally walked up to the table. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Hello, Brandon." He looked thinner, humbler. Somehow, he set a small wrapped package on the table. "For you?" Inside was a new leather journal. On the first page, he had written, "For the next story you need to tell." My throat tightened. "I don't know if I have another one left in me," I said softly. He smiled, eyes glistening. "You always do." And for the first time in years, I let him hug me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. But it was something fragile and real, the first step toward a peace we might both earn someday. That night, I sat in bed with the new journal on my lap. I ran my fingers over the cover, then opened it to the first blank page. The paper smelled of promise. I picked up my pen and wrote the first line. "Sometimes love breaks us so completely. It forces us to rebuild from truth." Then I closed it and whispered to the quiet room. "And this time, I'm writing for me. If you've ever felt abandoned, silenced, or unseen, remember this. Your story is not over until you decide it is. No matter who tries to write your ending, you still hold the pen. If my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what truth you've found the courage to speak. Your voice matters.